Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Needs Some Introduction. In today's episode, Darren and I will be discussing what we will be covering week to week coming up. In the meantime, also discussing in this particular episode a couple of different topics. We both saw Mickey 17 by one of my favorite directors, and Darren did some homework, as did I, in catching up on some of his filmography. I've seen all of his films, and we may touch on each one of them briefly here and see how Mickey 17 stacks up, or rather does not in some ways. And we will discuss Reacher, which is coming up on what seems to be a pivotal episode this week. But we'll discuss Reacher a little bit here. And also, Darren, I wanted to throw it into mix here, just in general, any recommendations we may have if you like this genre of the one-man army, one-person army, what other recommendations you may have.
So off the top of my head, that's a tough one. I'll have to think about it.
Well, I've written some down, so hopefully I can prime the pump and we can continue the conversation. So anybody who's there only wants to listen to the Reacher conversation, just check the show notes and I'll have timestamps there so you can jump past the Mickey 17 conversation and straight to Reacher. A little bit of news to kick things off. First of all, we hit 100, so there will be a video episode coming very soon.
Epic.
And I did tell people that any comments they put in there past 100, I would read out in a video. They can say anything silly they wanted me to say. And everybody was actually really sweet in all their statements. So nobody had me try to humiliate myself on camera. So
that's disappointing.
a little bit. So expect that video later this week. And then I think the first episode, the longer episode we'll do on camera would be the finale of Severance, which is coming up 1 week. So we have episode 9 this week, and then the finale next week, which should be a video episode. So for everybody out there who's been following along that coverage. And of course, if you're behind on that show, time to binge it because we're just about a day and a half away from, or just a day away actually, from the 9th episode. I haven't touched base with you on the other shows we're covering here in the show in a little bit, Darren, but Severance, how have you been doing with the last couple episodes of Severance?
It's been pretty interesting, hasn't it? I actually really liked the last episode.
Oh, you're one of the few, but
I don't know why. I just did. As soon as I saw the large vistas of that incredible place, I was like, this is a Ben Stiller directed episode, and I was with it, and I thought it was a bit shorter, and I don't know, I just really liked the feel of that kind of independent film type feeling of it, and I liked the revelation that we understand about Cobell. Yeah, very cool.
Yeah, I liked what it does for the show. I thought it was too long to be, even though it was, I think, the shortest episode they've ever done. And it was a little long for me. As Sona mentioned on the podcast, we did watch her brush her teeth for about 5 minutes. It might be an approximation, but it did feel like it.
And there was no title sequence for that episode. Point. So as soon as I understood that, I was like, oh, we're in for something different here.
That would have made the episode even longer. maybe a reprieve to some of that. I mean, beautifully made, and the performance is exceptional across the board.
It's just an incredible set or location. I mean, it was just stunning.
Yeah, absolutely. And how about the previous episode? That one was a big one. It's funny because I think that's what people reacted to, that if you look at IMDb, for example, where I kind of use that as just a bellwether for how people are reacting to things. I think the previous episode, the Miss Casey episode, had like a 9.6. So think about that. On a scale of 1 to 10, statistically, everybody gave it a 9 or a 10. That's a pretty high bar to clear, and obviously not the case with the next episode. And I think that was the whiplash that people were reacting to, that maybe they were expecting things to accelerate even more. I actually appreciated the fact that the episode took things down a little bit. I assume that the last couple of episodes are going to be really packed with revelations and action. So I'll take it.
That Miss Casey episode, I watched that quite late at night, and I think I was almost snoozing through it, and it was just like this strange fever dream of also another independent short film, a different one, right. And just they were calling it Severance of the Spotless Mind. But yeah, I think I'd like to see that one again. That's one that you could replay, and especially if we're going to get some more revelations coming up, we're really going to get more context about what they were doing, or they are doing, to Miss Casey, and how disgusting and horrible it could be. And just technically, that episode was incredible, and the different types of filming techniques they used, and the different, whether it was digital or film stock, or the different looks they were going for, it is astounding to let wash over you.
Directed by their cinematographer, the woman who's been the cinematographer for nearly all of these episodes. So I guess they was a smart choice. If there's going to be that many different film techniques required, then to have her do most of that actual directing work as well.
How fun. Yeah, step up, direct this episode. And she just took it and ran with it.
Well, really fun discovery I had in researching the episode was that she gave Ben Stiller like a Super 8 camera. The show was shot digitally, but she gave him a Super 8 camera for him to do second unit directing of all the flashback sequences, the romantic. So she sent him out to do second unit for her. So it's kind of fun, but also that's kind of why you have that feel of, everything is so digital and cold in the way the show is shot, and then that real warmth you see in those flashback sequences shot on film.
That's so cool, and that's just a look that Super 8 can give you, isn't it? You can't replicate that.
Yeah, and I love seeing the shot in light on film, and you really see the warmth of it compared to the way the rest of the show is shot. So very smart as always. Really, really thought out everything. Okay, so Mickey 17, what did you think? Table setting here is that this is Bong Joon-ho, who had this incredible, right before the pandemic, by the way, right before the world shut down, won the Academy Award, unheard of, South Korean film winning the Academy Award for Best Picture in the United States. Never happened before, obviously. Even just foreign films in general not winning the Academy Awards. And on top of that, a massive hit. It made almost $60 million in the United States, made almost $300 million around the world. And it's not some giant special effects blockbuster. It is a thriller about this family of like lower class people who are really hustling. And I guess this just resonated with people internationally, this idea that, like hustle culture, and how there's these people who just feel like they have kind of missed out on the not the American dream. This is the South Korean dream, but I think it's a universal message. And really like a near masterpiece. And I think on Rotten Tomatoes, it has like a 99% critic score and the 99% audience score. It's an incredibly rare achievement. And of course, anything he was going to do next would be a disappointment. And it's also a blank check. He got to make the movie that basically he would never, ever make in his lifetime. They give him over $100 million, a giant sci-fi epic. I'll just lead with that this film needs to make around $250 million or more to break even. And based on its opening weekend, even in South Korea, where it opened very well, even there, it's not doing great business. And this thing is not going to make money, but maybe it'll be a cult classic. All that remains to be seen. But given all that set up there, what'd you think of it?
No good. No. Cult classic. I can see that maybe down the line in the age, well, we're past the age of DVDs, but it'd probably be a good DVD rental to chuck on a Saturday night or something. But I love Parasite. I've seen it so many times. I think it is a masterpiece. It's a perfect film. I can just look at that and just let that wash over me. It's so good. Mickey 17, I was in it for the first half, maybe.
First half, really good.
Maybe.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But I think just a lot of the choices just made most, if not all of the characters quite unlikable. And it was really hard to stick with it. And I just left that theater just empty, just nothing. I just didn't feel anything. And the more I think about it, the worse I think about it. Yeah, and just from the very start, the voiceover narration from Robert Pattinson's character, I was like, oh, whenever you hear a bit of a voiceover, you're just like, okay, there's only a few classic films with a narrator narrating their own story. And just his voice was very off-putting. Mickey 17's voice. Mickey 18, I thought was
Yeah.
pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Yep.
thought they could have done much more with him.
Yes.
I'm not going to go into any spoilers, but
Yeah.
I think the likable characters were the women. So the
Yes.
his friend or lover,
Mm-hmm.
she was turning into something pretty cool, and also her rival,
Mm-hmm.
where there was a possible kind of threesome or partner swap. She was
Mm-hmm.
looking like a very likable character, and I was into her story, and then they
Yeah.
just dropped it,
Mm-hmm.
and I think they dropped both of their stories. And the movie turned into something else. And halfway through, I was like,
Yeah.
okay, this is completely different
Mm-hmm.
to what
Yep.
the setup is. And it was fine. It just wasn't particularly interesting.
Yep.
Yeah. So that's my take. I wish I loved it. I wish I loved it because I've done my homework. I've seen a couple of other Bong Joon-ho films recently, and this doesn't hold a candle, unfortunately. What did you think?
Yeah, I think I liked it more than you did. I have all the exact same complaints you did. I think on Letterboxd I gave it 3 stars, and it's a mild, and that's a recommendation for me. So it's like a mild recommendation. It is a huge disappointment, undoubtedly. I think I liked enough of it, even when it goes into its goofiest elements towards the end, that I enjoyed it. Some of the comedy, I think, towards the end really did work for me. But I agree with everything you said, where the first half of the movie, I was really in there. Mickey 18 shows up. This isn't a spoiler. I guess this is a minor spoiler if you've never seen the trailer, but they do give this away in the trailer. I really liked Mickey 18. The
Mm.
film suddenly makes sense to me. Pattinson's performance, who was great in both performances, by the way, immediately identifiable as one character or the other, just in his facial expression. So he's incredibly physical, the voice, everything about it, really well done. And then when Mickey 18 shows up, I'm like, oh, now I really want to know what's going to happen. And what is it? It's like, this is the whole Severance conversation. What is it that makes one version of yourself different than the other? And have they always been different from each other? And so that's where I'm fascinated. And like you said, at that moment, the movie does not care about that at all anymore. And I'm like, why? Why did we go in this direction now? Like, it was a very disappointing turn of events for me.
The creatures were really interesting,
Yeah.
I thought, but also they're very ugly. They're not very likable either. I mean, and I feel like it. I quite enjoyed his previous film, Okja.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was one of the best of that year. I think when that was produced, I was like, oh, I think I just got Netflix, and I was like, oh, this is a Netflix original film, I think. And I was like, wow, if Netflix is going to be doing films like this is going to be awesome.
Right.
Unfortunately not, but it was more of that the creatures in the second half of the film, which was fine. It was just didn't really play up to what I thought was going to be the strengths of this idea of cloning people or having copies of people.
Some of the stuff, the realization of the printing out of the bodies is so funny. The way that it gets stuck in the same place every single time made me laugh every single time. The way that people forget to put the tray out underneath the page, or in this case, this body, so funny. All that stuff is so clever and so well thought out. And then that kind of ham-fisted metaphor. I mean, I could, in a nutshell, the film really falls apart. First of all, because I really don't like the focus shift, like you mentioned, in general, after you've developed these characters and then you're really not paying attention to them as much. It really becomes about this. I mean, I don't even know if it's an ecological story or what the point of the bringing the creatures into it is, although that definitely is something that he's brought up multiple times in his films. So it is a concern of his, I would say. I don't know how it really pays off the conceit of cloning people, which is the central, it's right in the title, right? So I'm not sure how that plays in there, but all of it is just in the Mark Ruffalo performance, which I think that Toni Collette performance is actually pretty hilarious. That the fact that she sees this new creature and she immediately just wants to make sauce out of it, and like she is so convincing as that person, like that person who only sees the thing they see and nothing else in the world matters to them, and they're so self-confident about that. She's such a type that I buy. And she does a terrific job of it. But the Mark Ruffalo character, I don't know what he's doing. It doesn't work at all for me.
Yeah, Toni Collette's face is just incredible. Whenever you see her on screen, she's so unique. She swings for the fences as well. She just does whatever she wants. And I agree. I mean, the Ruffalo, is he supposed to be a Trump type character when
It's
his
definitely
supporters
part of that.
wear
Yeah.
red hats? But they didn't
Yeah.
really follow that in any way that was very satisfying either. And it's quite interesting comparing his performance here to Poor Things, where he
Yeah.
also
Oh,
plays it up some this
yes.
kind of cartoonish character, which I think
Yep.
was more successful there, where I found him a lot more
I loved him
enjoyable.
in Poor Things. I absolutely loved him in Poor Things. Poor Things, and I think this is a terrible performance. Yeah.
There is money on the screen here. It
Oh
looks
yeah.
so impressive.
Yeah.
The effects, the CGI, it's incredible. And I'm a sucker for sci-fi films, but it just didn't. It's just got stuck in the same sets. There was no real change in the alien planet,
Mhm.
and I thought everyone's asking him, what does it feel like to die? And we see some pretty grisly deaths
Mhm.
that he goes through, but I don't think we ever really got a sense of what it was like for him. And it just left me a little bit empty, which is unfortunate because I walk out of a film and I'm like, I want to feel something, but I was just
Right.
like, oh,
Mhm.
oh well, it was okay, it was fine, but yeah, just a little bit of a shame, unfortunately. Maybe that's the problem of giving someone a blank check.
Apparently he's been working on this or had been thinking about adapting this. This is a book, Mickey 7, actually. So, but I have a feeling from what I've heard, he just takes the concept and ran with it on his own, which is he kind of does. All of his films, almost all of his films have been adaptations, but they've been very loose adaptations. That this is a blank check for him. Yeah. And so I think this may be the time he knew he could get this done. I kind of am disappointed too that this has been 6 years now, partially because this has been delayed a couple of times. I do wonder if shooting at a Trump-like figure was part of the reason the film got delayed yet another time because it was supposed to come out last year. So that I think that potentially was part of the delay. Regardless of all that, I just feel like he's wasted a lot of time on this film, and it does feel like a waste of time. Not because it's terrible. I didn't think it was terrible. I just think it isn't up to par for him. And but maybe you know what? If he's been working on this for a while, I hope he cleans the slate and moves beyond it. And it is weird that he is in a way tying together so many things that we've seen in other ones of his films. Like these creatures, it's designed by the same guy who designed the Okja creature. And when it is curled up, it kind of looks like the Okja pigs. But when it's opened up, it kind of looks like the creature from the host. So it's like half fish, half pig. Like or it might even be furry. I think there's some fur on the outside of the bigger creature. It's a weird combination of some of the creature design he's had before. We've also seen like this creature surviving in a snowy outside where humanity is trying to repopulate a planet, like in Snowpiercer. There's these, the metaphor of like some kind of hierarchical object, whether it's Parasite going from like the top of that hill all the way down to the bottom during the flood, for example, or whether it is the train itself in Snowpiercer. And now we have the ship here as well. And, the people down below, like being thrown into the garbage disposal in the higher levels of the ship itself. So it's like you can almost take all of his previous themes and shove them all into this film. So maybe he was it's a bit of a palate cleanser for him. And of course, there's all the satire of systems of control and how they really fail and how everybody, basically the failure point of every single system is the people within it. So it's like that's always kind of like his defining theme, I think, of all his films. So I like that he has some of these themes in there, but I just have to say, in general, for me, he has like tiers of movies. And the sci-fi films, and I'm a big sci-fi fan too, are really his weakest films for me. Because you think about something like Parasite or Memories of Murder. Maybe we could talk about that for a few minutes because I know you just caught up on that. Or Mother. And by the way, those are my three favorite films of his: Mother, Memories of Murder, and Parasite. All stone cold classics, like on decade lists for me. They are ambiguous and they are full of people making terrible decisions, but characters you relate to. And then on the sci-fi films, like especially with these over-the-top performances, like whether it's the Jake Gyllenhaal character in Okja, whether it's the Tilda Swinton character in Snowpiercer, whether it is the Mark Ruffalo character in this film, it's very cartoonish. It's very on the nose. The lesson at the end is very simplistic, and it's the exact opposite of his South Korean thrillers, where almost every single one of them ends on this note of like a non-ending where you are like troubled for the rest of your life after seeing the movie. And these just end with like, and they all win at the end. And I'm like, what a weird contrast. I guess actually the host, did you see the host? The host kind of splits the difference between these two things.
Yeah, I saw the host a long time ago. I can't quite remember it, but I remember liking it. It's interesting that you talk about the comedy or the comedic characters in his American movies versus his South Korean dramas. There is those comedic characters and almost slapstick type comedy in these dark, smaller films, but they just kind of work a little bit better because there is just the opposite side of just the darkness and the drama that just hits you. But yeah, the comedic characters in the American films just they're a bit over the top, or the actors try to sell it too much, or like yourself, they don't really work for me. And yeah, Snowpiercer, it was fine, but I caught up with Mother last night.
Oh, you did? Okay.
I did, yeah, and so it's pretty fresh. And I watched Memories of Murder last week. As you say, I mean, they are stone cold classics. I mean,
in preparation to see Mickey 17, you're like, oh, I'm so disappointed with this. And then it made you go and watch these two movies that are like absolute, like best of the genre in many ways.
Just incredible. And I don't watch foreign films that often. So it's always a little bit of and I didn't know what these films were about. So it's a bit of a slog to get into them and to understand them. But the hits that both of those films have are devastating. And I mean, my jaw was open at some of the turns, especially this Mother. I mean, I didn't think I was going where it went. Yep. And I mean, that is just an incredible film. And I'm stunned that there's no remake of that film. It just feels like that is ripe for an American remake, to get an extremely classy older actress to play that role, even though it was played perfectly by that actress. You could get someone, and that would be an instant Oscar nomination, I would have thought, because they could just, it's such a meaty role. What an amazing film.
It's so funny too, because when I saw Mother, I watched it, even though it's like a decade apart when we watched this movie. It's similar experience where I had seen Memories of Murder, and I loved Memories of Murder. And by the way, just as a pitch for everybody out there to see Memories of Murder, it was inspired loosely by Seven, and David Fincher is a big influence on his films. And David Fincher watched Memories of Murder, and he's like, I want to make one of those. And he made Zodiac. And now, by the way, they use the same cinematographer. So there's a lot of shared DNA, even though they really in tone are so different. But they definitely are an influence on each other, even though their films, their end result is different. You don't see a lot of slapstick comedy in Zodiac, for example. But there is some shared DNA there, as opposed to Memories of Murder. And you make a really valid point there, especially with Mother. When I watched it the first time, I had no idea where the film was going. South Korean films intentionally can have a lot of tonal shifts. So I'm like, is this going to turn into like a very comedic crime thriller or something? I reluctantly watched it. I'd heard good things about it. However, it was pitched to me. It was not really pitched to me as a thriller. I didn't know if I was vibing with it. I think for the first 15, 20 minutes, I'm like, I don't even know what this movie's about. I don't know if I'm going to like this movie. And then, like you said, then I got really into the mystery and the discovery of it. And then there are multiple moments where I was like shocked, like utterly shocked at what I was seeing, and nothing more shocking the bookend, the final scene that bookends with the first, and the context for it all of a sudden, and you're like, oh my god, like what have I just been watching? It's like such a troubling film, but it's just utterly genius. And in a way, it's like people should go in like not knowing anything about it, because the more surprised you are by its twists and turns, And we're not even explaining the plot here. And I'm like, that's the right way to see the film. just trust us and go see it.
That's right, and he is a master at moving the camera and setting
Yes.
up scenes. So even though sometimes it is difficult to get into these foreign language films, the visual language is so confident. There's so much that you can get out of it, just apart from the actual story and the twists and turns. But that's interesting about Seven. I got real heavy Seven vibes at the end of Memories of Murder. That the one of the key exchanges between the three characters. I mean, it was straight out of that film. So that's interesting that he actually based it on that.
That final moment where, and I won't spoil it here, but the conversation
You can't spoil these films.
You can't really spoil this film. It's true, but the conversation where that the detective goes back to the scene of the crime, and that kid comes by and is just like, "Oh, there's someone else who's been here." Still just remembering it to this day just chills me to the bone. And that expression, just the way he looks into the camera, I think that's once again the tone management that didn't work for me in most of his English language films. And I hate to be so reductive that maybe it's just because English isn't his first language, so maybe he has trouble moderating the performances of the English language actors. He may not I don't know. Like maybe I'm being reductive there. I mean, he's obviously an incredibly adept person, and he has people on the set that can help him translate if he needs translation assistance, I'm sure. But it does feel like the tone is off because he does go for a wild tone in those South Korean films. And then it's a tool he uses to really like give you an incredible gut punch when he wants to. It's a completely different thing compared to these his bigger budget films.
Yeah, that's interesting that you say that. So he tries to lighten you up and to get you, give you a false sense of levity before he brings the changes that
Before
that
tearing
really
the soul out of your chest,
destroy everything.
Exactly. I mean, hey, the end of Parasite too, man. Like that non-ending there is also utterly devastating. Just this idea that someday we'll dig ourselves out of this. It's like, or maybe never. It's like really, it's just insane. But yeah, you just don't get that in these American films. So anyway, I will always line up to see what he makes. I was unfortunately disappointed with this. And here's a funny thing to say about this too. I think this movie would be better on a smaller budget. If this was a little more DIY and the characters were like out of a B movie or something, and it felt a little sillier, I think it would work better than having this really impressive visuals to sell this really kind of pat metaphor. I'm like, oh, right, I guess. That's a long distance to walk for that, I think.
And even, I mean, like I said about the two female characters his mates down there, they're so interesting, and there could be a bit of a relationship drama, or there's all sorts of kind of rivalries that could have gone on there that was way more interesting, I thought.
Right, when he shows up, and then there's the opportunity of having like the throuple, but then the French actress, beautiful French actress. I just saw her in Count of Monte Cristo, the remake that was really excellent, also.
She was great.
And then, like you say, she's a really interesting character that barely gets anything to do in the film. And then you could imagine, like, now they have to negotiate that. Now these two different beings don't want to die. And then if one does get regenerated, there's going to be differences between them. And then and then imagine these girls who are now seeing these slight variations. Maybe they want to swap now or something like that. So there's all this interesting character dynamic, like you mentioned, that could be developed there. And the film just doesn't care at that point. So it's a strangely constructed, especially if he's been planning it for this long. And he's a meticulous planner, by the way. He storyboards everything, which is how he can make some of these movies on a relatively small budget, because he knows what he's going to spend the money on and not spend the money on. Like you mentioned, there's a lot of times where people are just standing in rooms talking. So it's like you just have to reuse those sets so that you can spend the money on the effects later on. But that also is not necessarily a plus for the film. Could have been better.
Hopefully now he can modest thumbs up. Yeah, similar. I think I gave it 2.5 on Letterboxd. Do we know what he's doing next? Because hopefully the budget is reduced and he can sit down and start thinking about it.
I have no idea what he's doing next, but I assume he's got something pretty well on its way. I mean, he finished shooting this thing 2 years ago. So, and he used to put out a movie every 2 or 3 years. So seems, this has just been a very long window. So I assume whatever he's got going is probably well on its way. So hopefully we won't have to wait too long to see it.
Because yeah, he is a master, and I just love the way he frames some shots. Delightful.
I'm just really happy that you saw Memories of Murder and Mother. I wasn't expecting you to see Mother also, but I'm glad that you appreciated those because, yeah, those are knockouts. Oh, one more thing I would mention. This is available. I just saw this. His very first feature film is called Barking Dogs Never Bite. This isn't at the peak. Parasite, Memories of Murder, Mother are all masterpieces, practically. Maybe in that order. Parasite the best, Mother the worst, but all three of them on a different plane. Like better movies than you're likely to see all year, this entire year. So check them out as soon as possible. In the next level down, I have The Host there, and I also have Barking Dogs Never Bite, which is his very first film, which really feels like a dry run at Parasite and has this really great final moment again, kind of his motif in those South Korean films. And I do recommend this. This is about a guy who lives in an apartment complex. It's a very low budget movie, but very well made, as you would expect from him. There's a dog that's driving him crazy. He's lost his job and his wife is pregnant. And the stresses of the world, he's trying to play that everything's cool, but they're not. And he takes it out on this dog that's barking all the time. And he's trying to dispose of this dog. And at the very beginning of the film, it says no animals were harmed in the making of this film. It is very hard to believe that none of these dogs were harmed in the making of this film. So if you're sensitive to that, a warning, but apparently they were not. And he's trying to dispose of these dog. And of course, as you would expect, the first dog he tries to dispose of is not the real dog that's bothering him. So then he tries to undo that. And then one thing leads to another and it gets worse and worse. But it explores this kind of moment, this, hyper-capitalistic South Korean world and how people are being left behind. Very much the same themes as Parasite. And I really like this movie. And, like I said, very small scale compared to the much bigger, more elaborate Parasite. But it feels like Parasite. There's even a ghost story in the middle of it that someone else tells, which I love in his movies, by the way. He's hiding in the basement and the janitor there starts telling somebody this ghost story about the building. And then we see elements of the ghost story start playing out. So now it's like all of a sudden we're just like in Parasite, we're suddenly like caught up in this whole total other story. We're like, ooh, what's going to happen next? But we like take a break from the current story to go into a separate story. So it very much feels like what he did with Parasite to supreme effect, but its first attempt at that. And I think it's pretty easy to find. I think this is on Tubi. I think you can find it. And I recommend this one also. And then, of course, the bottom of the barrel here for me, all good films, by the way, just at the bottom, is Okja, Mickey 17, and Snowpiercer in that order. I really don't like Snowpiercer very much. It's impressively produced, but if I don't like the easy platitudes of Mickey 17, even more so with Snowpiercer for me.
I haven't seen it recently, and it didn't really do that much for me. I didn't think it deserved a rewatch.
It does look great, though, just like very similar to the Mickey 17 experience. Okay, let's take a little break, and then we'll get into Reacher. All right, so we're 5 episodes into Reacher. I like that today I saw in the headlines that Reacher mid-season trailer drops. And I'm like, mid-season? It's only the middle of the season? I thought it was almost over. And then in the trailer, it says, get ready for the finale. And I'm like, the mid-season and the finale are like 2 weeks apart. I don't know what they're talking about here, but I guess they're just trying to hype up the show. Tonight, or I guess tomorrow morning, we'll have this pivotal episode here in the current season of Reacher. And I don't think there's too much to say about Reacher. We can get into a little bit of spoilers. We're assuming here at this point that people have seen the current season of Reacher, so we are going to spoil what's happened up until this point.
I just think Reacher's better as a binge. I don't like waiting a week for an episode because, not to be harsh, but they're kind of forgettable. Like after I finished an episode, it's not like I'm thinking about the twists and turns. I'll just be thinking about 1 or 2 brutal and hilarious moments that he's done to someone. So it's right. It feels like a long wait for the next episode. I think I binged the first 4, and it just felt so good to do that. It's just like a dessert snack whenever I want, just like a sugary hit. I'm just waiting. Day after day, wait for the next one that I just want to just engorge straight away. And and yeah, get on with it.
To your point about how forgettable this is, I do enjoy it. I think we binged the exact same amount. I had seen like maybe half of the first episode, then I stopped. And then I kept saying, like, oh, I still got to watch that. Oh, I still got to watch that. And eventually, like a month later, I'm like, okay, let me binge it. And I binged the whole thing. And then that was the week that the fifth episode came out. So then I watched that one just a couple of days later. But I think we recorded in between. And I had already forgotten what had happened in the first four episodes. And it's so funny. I was getting ready to have this conversation with you today. And I'm like, oh, something important was happening at the end of last week's episode. And I can't remember. And then I watched the trailer and I'm like, oh, yeah, he's about to find out who the real bad guy is. And I had totally forgot that until I saw the trailer, which shows that moment. I continue to be very entertained. They cast this perfectly. He's the reason everybody shows up to see this show.
I think I looked him up. He's about 193 centimeters, which is, I don't know what that is, 6'2", 6'3".
He's maybe, yeah, I think so. Yeah.
That the other guy, the other henchman, is so much bigger than him.
Yes. That guy's like 7 feet tall. He was in the most recent Indiana Jones also. Yeah.
Okay. Oh my God, he's a giant.
Yeah, true giant right there. I find it funny that he is so beefed up. In the books, the Reacher character is even taller. He's like 6'5", 6'6", something like that. And he's a big guy. Like they describe him as well over 200 pounds, but not like 250 or 270 pounds, like 220 pounds, let's say. So very athletic, but because he's so tall, in a regular size shirt, he can be incognito. Like people don't realize that he's as imposing as he is, as opposed to Alan Richardson's version of it, where it's so funny because he's like so enormous. Like it's like he can never be nondescript no matter where he goes.
And these shirts that he gets from the op shops, they're just cut perfectly finish right at his bicep there. It's just he knows
when they have to get him his wardrobe last week. He's like, "What should I get you?" He's like, "Get me like a medium." All right. So if you are a fan of this type of thing, I did want to run down some one-man army type entertainment that you may want to catch up on. One I caught up with just this week, and it was worth it. I've been wanting to see this film, use it as an excuse to watch this, and I think it's available on Hulu right now. It's called Sisu. Have you ever seen this film?
Yes, I have. I'm very excited. I actually just thought of it just before you said that, the title. Yeah, great film. Really had a lot of fun with this, and it's it's brutal too, isn't it?
Totally brutal. Yeah, so if anybody doesn't know this is a Finnish film. The version on Hulu is dubbed in English, very well dubbed in English, by the way. I think some of these actors who I've seen in American films are dubbing their own lines. And I mean, the mouth matches most of the time. Sometimes they say like a one-word answer and their mouth's still moving, but a lot of times for the longer dialogue, it seems really, really well done. So it did not irritate me the way dubbing often can irritate me. But this is a Finnish film. Sisu apparently is a Finnish word that means this determination that builds inside of you when all hope is lost. And apparently this guy exemplifies it. And this is like they call him the immortal or something like that, where he can't die. And this guy literally cannot die. They try to kill him so many times. And he's like a gold prospector. And of course, I buried the lead here. This is during the Nazi occupation. So he gets to kill a lot of Nazis. And if you want to see a lot of Nazis get killed in really gruesome ways, this is a great film for it. And I just caught up with this and it was a blast. I really enjoyed this a lot.
He could be part of the Inglourious Bastards.
Yes.
I think.
Yeah, it could be a spinoff. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I thought it was quite interesting because it's about the Nazi kind of war machine is leaving the country, and as they're leaving, they're just destroying everything in their path and picking up women to take as hostages or slaves, and they're just destroying everyone. And so it's super dark times. And this guy at the start of the film, he finds his nugget of gold that he's been searching his whole life.
Pounds and pounds of gold. Yeah.
And you're like, oh, great. This guy's achieved his life's ambition at the start of the film. And then it just gets harder and harder for him to get out of it.
He mows down a lot of people, and some of the murders are really clever. Some of them are absolutely preposterous. But my favorite, I think, was when he is underwater and he needs to take additional breaths. So the people who are coming after him underwater, he is slitting their throats and sucking the air out of their lungs. I'm like, well, yeah, okay, never thought of that one. Okay, John Wick, of course, the John Wick films.
Loved the first John Wick, and then I think I saw maybe the third and maybe some of the fourth. But that first John Wick that's a classic, and all for his dog. So maybe yeah,
That's right. That's right.
yeah,
These guys always have dogs. Even Sisu has a dog, right? It's like a loyal dog.
that's right.
Adorable dog, by the way. Adorable dog.
Oh yeah, Sisu's dog just disappears for a while, goes off and does his own thing, comes back when he's needed. Yeah, he's awesome.
Sisu, he just jumps on a plane and the dog finds him somehow.
John Wick, I mean, it's just a giant franchise now, and there's spin-offs and all sorts of things. But that first movie was Ballerina. Yeah, okay. That first film is a winner.
This one is one of Netflix's biggest hits ever, and from a director I really like a lot, who made the excellent Green Room. But this came out last year. Green Room was incredibly brutal and violent. But this film is like a non-lethal Rambo. Rebel Ridge. Did you see Rebel Ridge?
I've not seen that. No, it's on my list.
Oh, you should check it out. The star of that, Aaron Pierre, he's going to be a huge star, and he's trained in non-lethal techniques. And Aaron Pierre does all his own physical work in this. He is always so relaxed. Everybody else is tensing up around him, and you just see him like so relaxed, so relaxed. He like closes the distance on someone, and then he's always like 10 steps ahead. It's worth seeing just for the action. It is like a realistic creature, like the way he's able to get himself out of these situations, impossible situations. And he does it so smart. Really highly recommended. And it's a huge hit on Netflix, so most people have probably seen this or hearing it. But if for any reason, like Darren, you haven't gotten around to it, definitely recommend it. It's such a fun film to watch, and actually deals with a real issue here in the U.S. with this civil asset forfeiture. They lay it out completely. It's like a little bit of like a stop and like kind of a little educational moment in the film, which is not its best moments. The action is really incredible, and Aaron Pierre is definitely going to be a star.
Yeah, I'll check out that.
I don't think that James Bond or the Mission Impossible movies count, because there's a team, there's gadgets. That's more like superhero stuff for me. What do you think?
I'd agree with that. I was thinking along those lines. I just saw a trailer for a new Rami Malek film. I think it's called The Amateur.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Mm-hmm. It's a pretty good trailer. It does show a bit more than you want to see in a trailer, of course, like all trailers these days. But that looks cool. So he's like a computer tech in the CIA or FBI, and he then changes to become in the field agent, but he uses his brain rather than his skills with a weapon to take down the bad guys, and that looks like it has a bit of promise.
It's like
Mr.
whether
Robot,
he's a one man,
whether he's a one man wrecking crew, I don't know. But he's an interesting face on screen.
A one man wrecking crew film that's upcoming, that is coming to Netflix this month, April 25th. Tom Hardy is in a film called Havoc, which is directed by Gareth Evans, who made the Raid movies. Have you ever seen the first Raid movie?
Yep. He's a talented guy, isn't he?
So and also the Gangs of New York. I'm sorry, Gangs of London, which also has a lot of crazy action sequences like that. But that's another one-man army type situation film, which is coming just this month. So I definitely wanted to include it here. But of course, it allows me to talk about the Raid, especially the first Raid film, which is just absolutely incredible. It's like being inside of a video game, literally fighting from floor to floor to floor in this insane setup here. So if you haven't seen the Raid, definitely check that out. Extremely violent, though. Extremely violent.
So good, and also very inventive with a low budget. I think it's set in Indonesia as well, so it's quite groundbreaking film, but low budget, amazing stunts, and incredible direction.
Mad Max, I have him on the list for sure.
Which one?
I just mean the character itself is this type of character, but I would say all the films basically. Well, maybe not. Mad Max 1 is not that, but I think that by the time you get to Road Warrior, and definitely when you get to like Beyond Thunderdome, he is at that point this impervious, invincible superhero, basically. And Furiosa, I throw her in the mix too. Or what's his name? What's the character's name in Furiosa who drives the truck? He would be on my list too. But
Can't think of his name, but yeah, he's a pretty cool character too, isn't he?
I love him. He's a great character. But I mean, I guess he's only really that type of character in a truck. Once he's off the truck, Furiosa is your better bet.
Yeah.
Indiana Jones is kind of this character, by the way, a much more comedic version of it. He's always kind of like bumbling his way through it, but I mean, he's able to kill a lot of Nazis himself in that first movie specifically. And so he's definitely kind of in there. And of course, if you talk about Mad Max and maybe even Indiana Jones, definitely the predecessor to Mad Max is the Clint Eastwood movies, the Man with No Name, the whole Fistful of Dollars and a Few Dollars More, which of course allows me to talk about. Those are actually remakes of the Akira Kurosawa films Yojimbo and Sanjuro. And I know you saw Seven Samurai this year, but you should catch up on Yojimbo and Sanjuro, which are the same stories, but even more clever, because it's not only that he's like a kick-ass guy, it's also that he's psychologically manipulating everybody around him. And it's so clever how he gets like one set of mobsters to hire him to kill the other set of mobsters. And him, by just like not talking and just being really still, is able to get all these people to destroy each other in a lot of ways and then walk away with all the money. Definitely check that out. And it has inspired in so many ways. That is maybe the inspiration for the past 60 years of all these characters. Definitely what they're trying to do with the John Wick story, the mythology, but at a much, much higher level than that very small scale gangster movie back in that Kurosawa movie. So that was my list, most of my list. Actually, by the way, one more thing I want to throw in there that I thought was kind of a fun version of this, a comedic version of it. But I thought that The Fall Guy was kind of this movie too. That it's like, he's so good at doing stunts that he's kind of, could survive any possible situation in his life.
That was a fun movie.
That was fun. I'm a big fan of that too. Anything else you want to throw in there? Rambo, of course. We got to mention Rambo, but anything else?
Yeah, well, if you go to the 80s, the very first Schwarzenegger movie I ever saw was Commando.
Commando, yes. Mm-hmm.
And I remember coming home late at night from some activity. I don't know how old I would have been, 9 or 10 or something. And Commando was on TV and I thought it was the best thing ever. I was like, who is this guy? What is he doing? Why has he got a rocket launcher on his shoulder in a shopping center? But yeah, that's a core memory of mine, is watching Commando for the first time. I think I've since watched it a number of times. Maybe it doesn't hold up as well as I thought.
There's still some really cool stuff in there, like that whole releasing the brake on the truck and rolling it down the hill to intercept the bad guys there near the beginning of the movie is such a cool thing. And then some of his one-liners, remember I said I'd kill you last? I lied. Still remember those one-liners. Arnold at his best. And definitely Arnold, by the way, Commando specifically, of all the Arnold roles, is really the closest parallel to what they're trying to do with Reacher. Although, it's Commando and like a highly skilled detective at the same time. But, it's very much in the Commando mold.
Yeah, and the detective part of Reacher is really interesting too. Like the way that he keeps cool and the way that he understands situations, and he later tells you. I mean, it's a very light level, but he kind of tells you what you're feeling if you're the bad guy in the scene. He identifies people's motivations in a scene, and he can tell what's going on and what the motivations are, using his detective skills so that he doesn't have to use his brawn sometimes, is also enjoyable.
I guess Batman is also a good corollary here, right? Batman is a detective. It used to be the Detective Comics was the original, and he was primarily a detective. And of course, now he is a detective who can beat up anybody. So it's like, that's kind of become, so the Reacher is maybe in some ways also inspired by the whole Batman character. Although, of course, he's never in costume, unless it's that tight t-shirt he wears all the time. I'll throw this in here too. I saw the first 2 episodes. I haven't seen the 3rd episode. Saw the first 2 episodes of Daredevil, the new one, and I liked them. I got a little tired of yet another Trump corollary storyline with the bad guy, what's his name? Kingpin, winning the election in New York. And I'm like, oh no, here we go again. I'm just tired of, I see it every day on the news. I don't want to see it here too. I'm like my own critics now on the podcast. But I was just like, here we go. And then I actually thought they added some interesting shading to this, that the appeal of the character of just basically saying like, just fill that pothole, at least in the moment, seems to legitimately wants to reform himself. Of course, he's going to turn into the bad guy again, we know, but it is interesting for the moment anyway. So I'm somewhat interested in it so far. Did you watch any of it?
Yeah, the same. Yeah, I've watched the first couple. The first episode is worth watching for the first 15 minutes, where they do this another impressive one-shot sequence that looks like it's straight out of a comic book. I mean, the lighting effects and the kind of fan service that they do it's epic, and it was really thrilling. And then the rest of it is not as interesting or exciting. It's people talking.
And also the fact that he's like not Daredevil right now. And I'm like, I don't know if I want to see, I hope this doesn't last too long. I don't want to go 5 episodes without him being Daredevil. He better be Daredevil like in the next 1 or 2 episodes, basically.
Yeah, it made me want to go and watch the original series. Right. Yeah, and I did show my son it's the second episode of the first season where he has that hallway fight, that one-shot hallway fight where he's not quite Daredevil, he's wearing a different costume. And the camera work is kinetic and brilliant, and the stunts are also brilliant. And he's a one-man wrecking crew in this hallway as a blind warrior. It's super fun.
Have you ever seen Old Boy, the South Korean film?
I have seen Old Boy. Yes,
I was just thinking about
the main reference,
the hammer attack.
Yeah, epic. That's another
one-man wrecking.
That's another Korean film.
South Korean, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
South Korean film as well, yeah. So they had a real moment in the early 2000s.
And he's got a new film coming out this year. He's one of my favorite filmmakers. So it's like, I mean, it's still thriving. There's quite a few of these South Korean filmmakers that work a lot in noirs and thrillers, which is a genre I really like. So always open to that. So maybe we'll have a little film festival series here on the podcast when that comes out.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
All right. Before I let you go, really quickly, just want to announce. So this Friday, Darren, here's your homework. Dope Thief, episode 1 and 2. And we will touch base sometime over the weekend or next week, maybe in the same time slot. And we will discuss that and maybe touch base with the latest episode of Severance and maybe the White Lotus. Oh, the White Lotus question. I guess we'll have to save it for next week. Someone wanted extra clarity on your Bollywood experience, which I think you talked about in some conversation. I may have cut it out, but you know what? We'll save it. We'll save it for next week because I know we're short on time. But someone wanted to know more about that. So in our YouTube comments.
Love the White Lotus episode this week, by the way. I thought it was a cracker.
Yeah, it was fun. And very much looking forward to next week where it's going to be the long night of that setup. And I think a lot of stuff is going to happen. And a lot of these storylines are going to culminate next week.
Full moon party. Lots of things happen at full moon parties.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you have to tell me about that, your experience there as well. So maybe we'll save that all for next week's conversation.
All right. Sounds good.
All right, Darren. Thanks again for the conversation.
Thanks so much.